Oh my gorgeous. I need to stop the recording. We bought the TPNW. It's a workshop hosted by CND and nuclear-free local authorities. We operate this issue. Can you all mute yourself, please? Otherwise, maybe Sarah could mute you if you don't mute yourself. So, as you know, for a few years now, we've been working to offset the problems created by our government's refusal to participate in the TPNW. So one of the ways that we're doing that is working to get our local authorities, whether that's city, town, or local council, parish council, even in some cases, to get them to sign up to support TPNW, to put grassroots pressure on the government to engage. So this workshop is bringing together members and supporters of CND who've either been successful already and have good news to share and best practice to share. It's for people perhaps who just starting out wanting to begin that process of getting their councils on board. So that's the purpose of the workshop this evening. I'm pleased to say we've got 3 short introductions to set us on our way, and then it'll all be over to you to share your experience and to ask questions and so on. So we've got 3 guest speakers. We have Seth Shelden, who is one of the co-founders of the New York campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, and he was instrumental in getting New York City to adopt nuclear disarmament legislation, and he's also a member of the ICANN international staff team. So hot foot from, well, hot foot virtually from New York this evening, so thank you for joining us, Seth. Then we will be having also Richard Outram from Nuclear Free Local Authorities, who will talk about the experience here that people have. And we're also hearing from Dr. Rebecca Johnson, who is a CND Vice-President and Director of the Acronym Institute for Disarmament Diplomacy. So there's lots of expertise there to share and to help you in your work. So first of all, we're going to turn to Rebecca, and Rebecca's going to kick us off with a quick roundup of the significance of the recent first meeting of states parties of TPNW in Vienna. So thank you for joining us, Rebecca, and share your outcomes with us.
Thank you very much, Kate. And I think this is a very timely meeting to hold, because we really had a wonderful series of events of civil society and parliamentarians and mayors for peace and of course governments taking part in a series of events in Vienna. And it was a remarkable testimony to the world's desire to be rid of nuclear weapons, that in the face of threats by nuclear armed governments that are ignoring and trashing international humanitarian laws, and I'm thinking particularly of the threats taking place in the context of the invasion of Ukraine, but also the build-up, the way in which NATO countries and others around the world have really been, with nuclear arms already, have been putting, increased emphasis on their nuclear weapons. So, but what we saw in Vienna was so many committed governments and campaigners and parliamentarians discussing how to take forward several important decisions, and they really were decisions, to implement and strengthen the growing nuclear abolition regime. So I first want to draw attention to the very strong declaration that came out of the first meeting of states parties on the last day, combined with the action plan, which contained 50 very specific kinds of actions. Now, these, of course, were adopted by the states parties, but there is so much in there that gives us the practical grounding on which to base how we campaign in our own countries. And I want to draw attention to 2 or 3 things. First, the declaration concluded, quote, "In the face of the catastrophic risks posed by nuclear weapons and in the interests of the very survival of humanity, we will not rest until the last state has joined the treaty, the last warhead has been dismantled, and destroyed the nuclear weapons."
Sorry, Rebecca, I'm just going to ask people, can you please mute yourself if you've joined recently, particularly if you're on a phone and Sarah can't mute you, because people are trying to listen to Rebecca and there's sort of noise in the background. Sorry, Rebecca, please.
No, thank you for that, Kate. I was wondering quite what was going on.
Sorry about that.
So I'll just take the very last sentence of that. "We will not rest." This is a sentence from the declaration adopted by the Vienna Conference. "We will not rest until the last state has joined the treaty, the last warhead has been dismantled and destroyed, and nuclear weapons have been totally eliminated from the earth." And then the action plan has these 50 very specific actions. And I'm going to draw attention to a few that really lend themselves to being used by civil society, and in particular, potentially being able to be used with councils. And therefore, we should think about how we can use them in the resolutions going to councils. And those are actions 3 and 7, which deal with universality and the role that civil society and parliamentarians and cities and others have to support universality, as well as, of course, the role that the states parties have, the obligations that they have. And then I also want to highlight 19 and 20, action points 19 and 20, which was specifically relating to victim assistance, environmental remediation, and international cooperation and assistance, which were the Articles 6 and 7 of the treaty. Now, why do I want to highlight those? Because I think they deal with practical issues of education and awareness raising, which are always attractive to councils to connect with. They are quite concrete, and that if we think about using them in resolutions to be adopted by councils, we no longer, I think we have to move beyond the city's appeal idea. And in fact, one of the proposals I'm going to suggest is that where your council is already adopted, so you can think about updating that in light of the documents adopted by the meeting of states parties, which of course is the first meeting after the treaty has actually been, has entered into force. So these particular issues allow or ask the council to provide awareness raising and education, but they also could be highlighted if it's appropriate for your council. And here again, I stress that it's important to tailor your resolutions to your own council. Is it near a nuclear affected community? Does it have, is it near a nuclear base? Is it near a nuclear warhead route? Think about all of those sorts of things. But we can talk about reaching out to nuclear affected people and communities. If you have affected, and I would say also reach out to those that have military communities that may themselves have veterans who were affected by things like nuclear testing, or workforces affected by all aspects of the UK nuclear weapons establishment, and look at also how we can look at making some kind of emphasis about for the councils to encourage and support and the increase in jobs that are consistent with the TPNW in disarmament, verification, and victim assistance and environmental remediation. So these are just some new ideas to talk about how we can use what has come out of Vienna in ways that are actually very practical for us to do on the ground in our cities and town and county councils, because we know we're not going to get a decision immediately made by the government, but our councils communicate with our MPs in our areas, which in turn helps to change what Parliament thinks about these issues and the pressure going on Parliament and the government to do certain key aspects that will increase awareness and start bringing the UK into this new part of the disarmament and non-proliferation regime. And I'll leave it there.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. That was really interesting and very practical, and great to have those specific parts, those specific numbered items highlighted. I think that's very, very useful. So, Seth from New York, over to you.
Well, thanks so much. And thanks for having me here to tell New York City's story, and also for being here on this really hot day. I think we have a really compelling story, and I can talk about it forever. So you'll have to stop me or speed me up when you want me to stop. But yeah, as was said, I work on the international staff team for ICAN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. But as a born and bred New Yorker, I'm also, really keyed into what we can do here locally. And I'm one of the co-founders of the New York Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, along with some other New Yorkers who many of you might know. I guess I'm tasked with telling a bit about our story, which I think, again, is super intricate and compelling, but I'll try to just hit the highlights. I mean, as always, advocacy is really specific to the place and what we're trying to do. Some of our story is very specific to the bizarreness of like antiquated New York City bureaucracy. So perhaps I don't need to get too far into that. But we worked for our city's appeal legislation. Oh, is there a screen recording happening or sharing?
I think someone's inadvertently sharing their screen. Sarah, could you possibly from behind the scenes sort that out for us?
But you can hear me okay, yeah?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, go ahead.
Just keep talking. I mean, yeah, in New York, we work through the city council. I mean, some cities appeals and some legislation, of course, depending on where you are. And I'm sure all of you know more about this for your own localities. Things could be passed by a mayor or by an executive member of the executive body in a city or a township. In New York, we wanted to go through the city council to adopt the city's appeal legislation that we worked on. And our city council is comprised of 51 council members representing 51 districts. And it all sounds like a very straightforward democratic procedure, but what I learned through the 3+ years of getting this work done, and which was a bit of a shock to me as someone who grew up in New York, is that the speaker of our city council holds extraordinary power in our council, so much so that if the speaker doesn't support an initiative, it basically doesn't matter if the entirety of the council wants it to happen. It's not going to go through the committee process. It won't come to the floor for a vote without the speaker's support. And that was basically, I'll get back to that, but that defines the drama that made this a very long process for us. And really, we got deep into the weeds. It took basically 2.5 years for us to really get this through. We also carried forward our work in the height of the pandemic, which for those of you who are now taking forward resolutions, maybe that won't have the same pattern because, although the pandemic rages on and the death tolls continue to be staggering and many people are suffering, it does seem like many cities, municipalities have figured out ways to carry forward their work. And it will maybe not as stalled as the New York City Council was for a while. Anyway, I'm sure Richard will elaborate more about specific procedural issues for like what people are working on. But the other thing I wanted to know at first about our legislation is that and this really follows on what Rebecca was just saying in her remarks, that she thinks we can think about having our cities and municipalities move beyond just the city's appeal component, the ICANN city's appeal component. And for us, what we're really proud of is that this was not just about the New York City joining the city's appeal, but the legislation that we brought forward is a real comprehensive package of disarmament-related legislation that we think other communities can really use, and feel free to be inspired by, we hope, because I'll tell you more about what we did with it. I guess most people here know what the city's appeal is, so that was obviously one component of it, but just in case you don't, I mean, the ICANN Cities Appeal, and you can find it. I don't know if I could share my screen too, but I could pull it up for you. But it's the website is cities.icann.org, and then Sarah just linked the cities in the UK that have joined it. But it's basically an initiative from ICANN, whereby cities and other localities in nuclear armed countries and nuclear client countries, that is, like, you know, some people call umbrella states or something, would say that even though our government has not supported the TPNW, we, the citizens of our locality, call on our federal government, our national government, to sign and ratify the TPNW. And it's a really wonderful and meaningful tool for those of us who work for the treaty, because you know, we're often dealing with these, for many reasons, but we're often dealing with these arguments from nuclear armed states that the TPNW, something to the effect of, you know, that's great that you have like the support of the vast majority of the world, but our citizens don't support it. And we can then very easily point to these resolutions and say, you're wrong. We know that you're wrong. And, you know, we've had hundreds of cities join this, and it's, you know, and we want more. We've got, you know.
You've had 6 minutes, Seth, by the way.
Okay, 6 minutes left.
No, you've had 6 minutes.
Oh, 6, okay. Well, yeah.
2 or 3 minutes left.
I'll just say that what our legislation does, it joins New York to the city's appeal. It calls on New York City's comptroller to divest New York City's finances from companies that manufacture and maintain nuclear weapons. It reaffirms New York City as a nuclear weapons free zone, so that we're building on prior legislation that was passed by the New York City Council in the 1980s that created New York City's nuclear weapon free zone, but didn't really do much with it. So now we're trying to take that forward with a law that has established a committee that's responsible for programming and policy related to New York City's status as a nuclear weapons free zone, and that recommends policy and builds educational programming. And yeah, and so that's what we've done. And of course, we're standing on the shoulders of so much work that's happened in New York, you know, from the John Hersey's New Yorker articles about the humanitarian impact of the U.S. atomic bombing in Hiroshima, to, of course, the 1982 march and in Central Park. And I'm actually wearing a shirt right now today about our 40th anniversary commemoration programming we did for the 1982 march, which was just last month, that 40th anniversary. And so we're really focused on New York City's legacy, not just the city's appeal, but because New York has a special role, of course, in nuclear. I mean, it's called the Manhattan Project for a reason, right? And we want to help other people understand the legacy of New York and everything that we are continuing to do around nuclear weapons, including our continued investment in the industry. We estimate that New York City public pension funds have approximately $475 million invested in manufacturers and of nuclear weapons, and we're working with the comptroller and use our legislation now to divest, and that's part of our package. I mean, today, just I guess I can close with this, like what we're working on. We're working on implementing the legislation. It's been adopted. Some pieces don't require further action. The city's appeal is done, right? You know, it was just a declaration essentially. But the divestment piece involves work with our comptroller. This committee I referenced, it needs to be set up, and it's a big focus of our work right now. I don't know how many of you saw this PSA from last week. Perhaps a lot of you. It's been making so much news that the New York City government sent out about how to survive a nuclear weapons attack. It's like it's so embarrassing and gobsmackingly horrible, and it really connects to the work we're doing, because we've been lobbying our mayor to set up this committee which would work on things like this, and so far they haven't done it. So they went out and with this really just asinine program that like it undercuts. That's bad for so many reasons. I mean, it's bad because well, the advice is terrible, and second, because it reinforces the sort of in the duck and covers type of way of the 1950s to 1980s, you know, this civil defense kind of everything's okay and trying to like normalize nuclear weapons, and it undermines all the work that all of us are doing, I think, in a really bad way. And so anyway, that's what we want to be working on. We want to be working with the city through this committee that we've now gotten this mandate to set up. We're building a handbook for other cities. We have a website, nican.nyc, that basically can elaborate on our story and the work we're doing, and that perhaps you, in taking forward your work, could use. And we're doing other things too. We've just released this. I have this map. It's like a tourist map of New York City that's meant to look like a fun tourist map, but it's not fun. It's about all of the New York City legacy sites, places where New York City built the bomb, and places where New York City hosted nuclear weapons, because we, you know, nuclear weapons used to be in a ring around New York City, the New York missile bases, and you know, New Yorkers don't know this. So, you know, we're going to do programs around this, like for instance, at the
You've had 10 minutes now, Seth.
Okay, I'll just wrap up. We're going to do like a bus tour at the NPT RevCon. That's going to like basically take people along the route and teach them about New York City's legacy sites. So we're always doing our activism and like continuing to do our programs. Our legislation, it was introduced in 2019. I'm happy to talk about how we got it done, you know, and any specifics of this crazy process. But it was adopted finally in December of 2021, and there were many weird steps along the way, and some of you may have helped us with some of those steps. Like we had this massive hearing.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to.
And now we're very proud of it. So thank you for having me.
You did say I'd have to tell you, so now you're being told.
I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. And as people will no doubt ask you questions, you'll be able to give some few more short clarificatory answers in a bit. So thank you so much, Seth. That was incredibly interesting. And now, Richard, over to you. Richard Outram from Nuclear Free Local Authorities.
Okay, thanks, Kate. So I'm the Secretary of Nuclear Free Local Authorities, but I previously worked for Yorkshire CND on the Nuclear Banned Communities project. And I've got a background of working as a policy advisor in local government. So I'm fairly familiar with how local government works. And I just wanted to kind of pass on some practical ideas and thoughts really about how maybe you can work in the local government environment, because clearly you're here because you want to get your local council to pass a resolution. So there's two elements of this really. You can look for the council to pass a resolution. You can also look for your local councillors to actually sign an individual pledge, which has been produced as well in support of the TPNW. One thing that's worth looking at, if you've not already seen it, is the London CND toolkit, which is quite useful, with lots of tips around wording for motions, wording for letters, things like that. So in terms of taking this forward, I guess there's three routes you can look at really. There's a direct approach to your local authority. There's an approach via your local elected member at your ward level. And the other way of doing it is if you're in a political party, perhaps through the political party that you're a member of, obviously, particularly if you're in a party that has the majority control of your local council. And you can approach councils at any level. So it can be from town, parish council upwards to large unitary authorities that control cities or counties. But these three routes are equally valid. So in terms of if you're approaching your council directly, the kinds of things you can do is pretty much all councils have slots within their council agenda for public questions. So you can table a public question, gives you a chance to go to the council, ask that question. You can lobby councillors as they enter the council chamber. You can send them leaflets in advance about what your public question's about. That's one way. Likewise, you can also submit a petition. Most councils have a slot on the agenda for petitions to be considered, and petitioners can normally address council, and they usually have a petitions committee as well. The other thing you can also do is approach the leader directly by writing to the leader, or usually the majority of councils now have an environment cabinet member that deals with climate change issues. And as you'll be aware, most councils have passed climate change resolutions. So it's quite a good idea to try to link the nuclear weapons issue with the climate issue. And obviously, as we're aware, the massive humanitarian and environmental damage that's caused by nuclear weapons. And given that local authorities have a public health care duty, it's a good angle to actually use to try and get them to listen. The other thing you can also do then through writing to the leader is to ask for a meeting. And likewise, if you ask a question at the council meeting. The other route you can look at is going through your local elected ward member. And most ward members now are starting to go back to face-to-face advice surgeries. So that's a good way of actually going to speak to them directly. And they may well raise the issue with the cabinet member or the leader, and it might be possible to arrange a meeting via that route. The third way of doing it is to look at the party route. So if you're in a political party that may possibly be disposed towards supporting you on this issue, is using your party mechanisms through branch, through constituency, through district party, if it gives you a chance to meet with councillors. And the other thing is, if you have a local MP, it's worth checking if your MPs actually sign the parliamentary pledge, because it's very common for local MPs to meet on a regular basis with the council leader. So it's one way of getting them to raise the issue directly with a council leader. So these are all potential routes in. And of course, you don't have to just use the one. You can actually use one or more. You might actually want to use all of those particular routes to try and get into meeting with councillors. Just a couple of tips, really. First of all, it's worth being aware of what your council meeting cycle is, because normally when council groups, political groups propose motions, they normally do so 2 to 3 weeks before the full council meets, because there's generally a 10-day or so deadline for motions to be submitted. So you need to be talking to whoever is in charge, or whichever group you're looking for support from, fairly early on, certainly several weeks before council actually takes place. You also need to think, when might you be best trying to get the group to take forward a motion? They might want to take forward a motion around a particular date that relates to the history of nuclear weapons. For instance, the UN Day for the total elimination of nuclear weapons in September, that could be something you could do something around. Obviously, January, you've got the enactment of the treaty. There's a few meetings that you probably won't get very far with, particularly the one in the lead into the local election, because most councils tend to look at very local issues rather than international issues, because obviously they're trying to get votes. So they tend to go for motions that relate to their actual constituents on the ground. Another thing you might want to do is find out whether there are any councillors already active in your CND branch. That obviously would be one obvious route in. And all councillors complete something called a declaration of interests. And it's worth, if you go on your council website, looking up the councillor, and they will have a declaration of interest. And that's often useful because people will write in if they're in particular groups. They might indicate, for instance, if they're a Quaker, they might be active in, say, the Red Cross. So these are potential routes in, because you can then contact the councillor and say, this is what the Red Cross says about nuclear weapons. To me, that's an obvious way of actually immediately getting a contact with that local council. That's another way in. I would also say you need to check, is your council a member of Mayors for Peace? If you're not sure, you can ask me, because as well as being the NFLA secretary, I'm also the Mayors for Peace secretary for the UK and Ireland. And the other way you could look to get into your council is your council twinned with anywhere, and has that twin town or city passed a resolution in favour of the treaty? Again, that could be another way to maybe gain the interest of your local authority.
You've had 8 minutes, Richard.
Okay, well, I think I'll shut up there, because that's pretty much covered the comments I wanted to make at this point. Obviously, very happy to answer questions or respond to emails after the event. Thank you.
That's brilliant, Richard, and I'm sure that's really helpful. Now we've got a bit of time now for you all to make your points. So you can ask questions, you can talk about the experience you've had, successful or unsuccessful, anything you like. I would ask you please to put your hand up virtually, because you're spread across 3 screens. So unless you do that, I won't necessarily see you waving. So just to remind you, probably you'll find your virtual hand under the reactions at the bottom of the screen. You click on that and then you can raise your hand. So who would like to contribute first? Declan, over to you. Introduce yourself, please.
Hello, good evening, one and all. First of all, thank you very much to the speakers. It was very enlightening, the information that you shared with us. So thanks very much for taking the time to do that. My name is Declan Baisley. I'm actually the Deputy Mayor of Chippenham Town in Wiltshire. So I plan to bring this motion forward to our next full town council meeting. I do feel we'll have a good level of support. So I'm hoping that we can be the first town in Wiltshire to join the declaration. But then from there, I'd like to spread that to other towns in the area. So we've had success in Chippenham with declaring our ecological and climatological emergency, which has since been adopted by towns in the area. So I'm hoping that it can spread a bit like wildfire and also be adopted by other towns. We will have a bit of a challenge with the unitary authority because it's quite heavily conservative. Well, in fact, it is majority conservative. So they'll obviously be the ones in favour of keeping nuclear weapons. But we will try and make some leverage, and hopefully, as planned, it can make a difference when more and more people join up for the movement. So yeah, thank you very much for the information that was shared. I'm sure it will be very useful in putting a motion forward.
That's brilliant. Congratulations, Declan. That's first up a really good news story. Brilliant. Okay, who's next? Pam, over to you. Unmute yourself, please.
Yes. Hello. This is Birmingham. Well, actually, I'm working with West Midlands CND, but I live in Birmingham, so I'm using obviously it's the most important thing for me to do. Our problem is that there's a Labour majority on our council, and they kind of kowtow to Labour policy. And so they kind of say, well, it's not Labour policy, so we're not going to support it. We've approached, I think we've got about 12 of the 70 odd councillors in Birmingham who have signed the pledge, but I'm very dubious about getting any more. I'm going to start working on the Liberal Democrats who've made some gains in the recent elections. But any help that we can get from people in the Labour Party would obviously be very valuable.
Thanks very much, Pam. I know that the Lib Dems are just going through an assessment or a kind of rewriting and scrutiny of their policy in relation to nuclear weapons. So be interesting to keep an eye out on that. Okay, David McKenzie next, followed by Elizabeth Worrell. David, over to you.
Thank you, Kate. Really a question, I suppose, for Seth in particular. One of the experiences we're having in Scotland is that 3 of our appeal cities, Edinburgh, Glasgow and Stirling, are also on the track of nuclear weapon convoys. And Scottish CND has recently asked them to consider a position in terms of informing the public about the risks. And these three cities have, well, one of them hasn't answered. Glasgow's answer is appalling. And Edinburgh is basically saying we don't want to alarm anybody. I think my general point is, if you know that the appeal has been signed, adopted by the council, how hard do you push for, you know, what is really compliance, or do you tread softly? I'm not sure about that. You see what I'm driving at, I think.
Thanks, David. I'm going to ask the speakers to kind of accumulate answers and any more feedback, and I'll call on them at the end, just so, or when there's a gap in contributions, so we can get lots of you in first. Elizabeth, over to you, unmute. There you go.
Hello, I'm from Leicester CND, and we have a problem that we were doing really well with our mayor, who is a mayor for peace, and says he has been a member of CND before he was a member of the Labour Party, and he's our city mayor. Has always, you know, tried to come on Hiroshima Day and things like that before, obviously before the lockdown. In February 2020, a group of us, CND plus someone from Pax Christi, Carissa, and other people from Leicester went with a meeting with the city mayor and the deputy mayor in his office, and he said if we could get a petition to the council, then that he would, you know, that would happen. So we got a petition to the council on the 17th of March 2020, and it was accepted by the mayor, and he said he would look to the motion for the council meeting in June 2020. And that's where the story went a bit haywire, because obviously all council meetings were stopped because of the lockdown. And I started again when they started to say they were going to have meetings again last October as Leicester CND sort of representative. And I'm getting very little response. I've tried, you know, writing personally to the mayor. I've tried working with the man in his office, who is not the person who was dealing with us when we went for the initial meetings, but somebody else, who eventually said, oh yes, he talked to the mayor about it and they'd get back to me and it would be on the council meeting in July. And the time went and I went to see him. Oh, and he was either not there or in a meeting. So I thank you very much for all your help, and I shall go through. We have actually written to the deputy mayor, and I'm going to go to our local councillors now. I believe the next meeting is in September. So wish me luck, because all summer we're going to be writing to people. We even had a letter to all the councillors, you know, to put in their boxes just before the meeting, so they'd have the leaflet from CND, information about the treaty, information about ICANN. And of course, we do have Matthew Belton's father on our committee here, you know, because he was brought up in Leicester, and he was a member of ICANN that went to get, I believe, the Peace Prize. And his father is very active peace activist, and has now returned to live in Leicester. So he is with us. So, you know, we have people who will, you know, who know people, who will get to people. But at the moment, I you know, was getting a bit desperate. But I shall carry on. And thank you very much for the speakers and all the help. Thank you, Kate. Thanks,
Elizabeth, and good luck with that. Definitely, we'll be rooting for you. Okay, Anne Farr, over to you from Pax Christi. Unmute, Anne.
Thank you. Working on my iPad instead of laptop to try and find somewhere cooler. Thanks very much for this opportunity and for listening to the speakers. We have I live in Coventry, and we've had a campaign of persistence, I think is the only, and determination for 10 years in trying to get our council to divest from nuclear weapons and from other arms trade, all the arms trade really, in our local pension fund. But we have also had people approaching the council about the support for the TPNW. I have to say that we haven't got very far. So I sympathise with others who've tried and are feeling a bit despondent. We're not feeling despondent, but we have tried everything that has been suggested by the speakers. And that includes, individual MPs, the council, petitions, letter writing, getting allies, and so on. We recently moved outwards towards getting allies in West Midlands CND, which has proved very useful because more people are being made aware. But one of we're a city of peace and reconciliation, we're a city of sanctuary, and we've made the links between war and refugees. And we've also made the links with the environment. But we're also, we have been a long-standing member of Mayors for Peace, but that doesn't seem to hold very much water. And I would be interested in having some more support and information about the responsibilities, if you like, and the commitment made by those that sign up to that, because I'm sure other councils too are not really taking it seriously. And of course, when we come to our annual service for Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it's remembering, but for me, remembering is no good unless you commit in some active way to never again. So comment and also any further ideas, because we've been very active for a long time on this, and I'm really glad of this opportunity to listen to others.
Thanks, Anne. Thank you very much. Chris from Milton Keynes, over to you. Mute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the main question for me is whether to go, we're just starting out on this process. I mean, this is really day one, is whether to go just for a declaration at the start and leave out too much emphasis on where it might lead to in terms, for example, of divestment or public education, or whether it's better to be honest and upfront with the council about what you would like to do with the declaration from the start. And that was an issue that was, I think, relates mainly to what Seth said. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Chris. Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands. Yes, I am. I'm seeing Hilary Evans. Hilary, over to you. Unmute. There you go.
Yeah. The problem, I'm from London Borough of Richmond upon Thames, and the problem that we've had, we got together a little group of Peace People, Amnesty, Quakers, Green Party, and so on, to approach the council on this. And the problem that we've had is they keep saying this is not a local matter, and we've tried all sorts of ways to persuade them that yes, it is a local matter in all sorts of reasons: financial, climate, humanitarian. Pointed out that one of our twin towns has passed a resolution, but they're still absolutely adamant. And the leader of the council is absolutely adamant. He's a Lib Dem. I've spoken actually to quite a few different councillors on the council, and they start off saying, oh yes, that's a good idea, and then obviously pressure is put on them and they come back and say no, this is not a local matter. And it's just a complete stumbling block whatever we try and whatever arguments we put forward.
Thanks very much, Hilary. Anyone else coming forward with a question or comment? Okay, right. Well, I'm going to revert now to our speakers. There's lots of really interesting material there for you to comment on, as well as some more specific questions. Seth, I'm going to come to you first. There was a direct question from David there and lots of other stuff for you. So over to you.
Sure. I'll take a crack at some of the ones that seem for me. David asked something to the effect of, now that once it's adopted, what can you do to take it forward and push for compliance or respond to things that are clearly not in line with your city or municipality that's doing something that's now, contrary to the city's appeal? Well, my answer, I guess, is, that's where we are in New York City too right now. I think this is a question about advocacy and law in general. Like, when your government does something terrible, what can you do? And I think it's also a matter of what your legislation does and says. The great thing about the New York City legislation is that it says so much. So we have a lot of tools, I think, now that we can use. So, for example, this PSA that I mentioned, this horrible PSA that the New York City government has just released about how New Yorkers can protect themselves in the event of a nuclear attack. We now have this legislation, as I think it's similar to your question, right? We can say, like, this is unacceptable. New York City has totally rejected nuclear weapons. And we have this committee that we need you to set up, that we're working with you to set up. This underscores why it's so urgent to set it up. And so we're very lucky to have this in our legislation, because now this explains for the world how important it is to have a committee that actually recommends policy, that takes forward educational initiatives and works with the city government to avoid embarrassing missteps like that. And so, but I guess the basic answer relates to how you advocate in your particular place. I mean, for us, it's continuing to make noise. New York City is a noisy place, so we work really hard to go back to the people that are supporting us in the first place, the legislators, the bureaucrats that we worked with, and to make our case to take this forward. But it's very ad hoc, I guess. I can also respond to Chris's question, like, about whether to focus on only the city's appeal or to try to do more. Again, for the reasons I just mentioned, I think it was really great that we were so ambitious, because now we can have so many tools beyond just the city's appeal. If we didn't get it adopted, which was a very dramatic thing, we got it adopted at the very end of the legislative session. If we hadn't, we would have had to start all over again. If it didn't get through, maybe I would have said that I wish we did something less ambitious, like just the city's appeal, so that we had it. So it's very ad hoc. I mean, it's a question, I suppose, only you can answer. But I think we're very grateful to have all of these tools, not just the city's appeal, for reasons that Rebecca was saying early on too. It's like what we should be doing now. And it also relates to Hillary's question too, I think, about how counselors respond, that this is only a local, this is not a local matter. Something that, of course, all of us, I think, have heard within intransigent representatives who say, don't bother us about this. This is for the federal government. So for that, in New York anyway, we have so many arguments about what the local connection is. We have affected communities throughout New York. New Yorkers are still suffering from the effects of the Manhattan Project and radiated sites. And we have federal cleanup sites that relate to it's such a local matter. And so we have lots of great arguments, but I think you probably do too, maybe not the same ones, but the divestment component is a huge way in for a lot of us, I think. So I encourage people, if they haven't yet, to check out the Don't Bank on the Bomb report and do a bit of research about what your city or your whatever municipality, who their banks are, what they're investing in, because that's a great hook for people to be like, this is not just about us telling the federal government what to do. This is about us acting locally, getting our money out of this system. And that should be part of our legislation. So those are the 3 questions I think that were toward me.
Thanks very much, Seth. And yeah, I mean, the divestment campaigning is really getting traction these days. So I think that's really important for us to be alert to. Sarah, have you got something quick? Because that's sort of
it's a response to the woman from Richmond.
Okay. The thing is, I'm now in the closing contributions for the speakers, but if you're going to be very quick,
well, it was only that. Oh God, now it's fleeting out of my mind. But it's to do with how to tackle this issue. Oh, I know what it is. Yes, it's trying to see if the media will pick up on this stupid response and say whether they think it's local or not local. So get them to unpick that so that the council will have to face the reality that it's very much a local matter. I used to live in London all my life mainly, And I thought, oh, this is all right. When the bomb falls, all my friends and family, we'll all go together. And then I thought, oh yes, but the National Gallery will go too. So that's not okay. Anyhow, thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, that's a good point there about using local media. And I know we've had a previous workshop on local media usage, so I think that's very important. Okay, I'm turning now to Richard. Over to you for your concluding remarks.
Thanks, Kate. I guess two things really. In terms of Mayors for Peace, people are asking me for what the commitment is of mayors and authorities to Mayors for Peace. I think one of the problems we've got in the UK is the vast majority of mayors are ceremonial rather than elected with executive powers. So we're in a strange position where, unlike most of our European and international colleagues, we have mayors that turn over literally every year. And the problem is, over the passage of time, you have mayors of different complexities and beliefs, and many of them have kind of lost contact with the original commitment that was made when the authority signed up for Mayors for Peace. So it's quite common for us to encounter this as well, where, you know, we have towns and cities don't even know they're actually in Mayors for Peace, to be candid, and they're certainly not necessarily active. All I can say on that is I'm relatively new to post. I started in November last year. We have written to all of our Mayors for Peace authorities and given them information about Mayors for Peace, and we've told them about the resolution and urged them to try to pass the resolution. And we've also asked them to become active in terms of marking Hiroshima Day, Nagasaki Day, looking at promoting peace education, looking at perhaps setting up peace trails or peace gardens. And this is something we'll be following up in the next month or so, certainly with Hiroshima and Nagasaki coming up. There's also feedback that we've got from first MSP, because I was privileged to attend that as well on behalf of Mayors for Peace in the UK and Ireland. So we're certainly trying to kind of make them aware of that commitment as a Mayors for Peace town or city. But it's difficult, to be honest. It's difficult in the UK particularly. The other thing is, in terms of the resolution, I guess it's really what Seth said, really. It depends on your individual circumstances. I mean, in a city like Manchester, where I work, it was very easy to get a fairly diverse resolution because we were the first nuclear-free declared city in the world. But it's a lot harder where you've got a local authority that's very divided politically, and even within particular political parties, there can be particular views that are completely divergent. So you've got to weigh it up, and there's a number of example motions, for instance, in the nuclear banned communities pack you can look at, or if people want to email me, I can send you examples as well. Specifically in terms of pension fund divestment, what I would say with that is you need to look at who manages your pension fund, because although you may be from one authority, chances are that your local government pension fund would be one of many authorities within that, and it can be managed by a completely different authority, and it's quite difficult to actually get influence with that pension fund management board. You need to identify if you've got a specific council elected representative on there that you can work with. But I have to say, in Greater Manchester, we have really struggled to get anywhere with this at all. We've got Tameside manages our pension fund. I have to admit, it must be one of the most reactionary Labour authorities you're likely to encounter. It's very difficult to make any headway with them. So good luck on that. On the local matters thing, just one last comment, really. You need to kind of try to relate to the duties, I think, that local authorities have. You know, they have a duty around public health. There's no greater threat to public health, really, than actually your town or city being annihilated by a nuclear weapon. So it's a pretty pertinent local issue, I would suggest. And at the beginning, somebody mentioned around nuclear weapons convoy routes. That's another good issue, I think, to pick up on, because if you're on a route, that's another issue in terms of what about emergency planning? You know, this is a consequence of Britain possessing nuclear weapons, that your town and city is potentially under a threat from an accident involving a nuclear weapons convoy. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks very much, Richard. That's really interesting and helpful. Right, and especially if you don't mind people contacting you. I don't know if you put your email in the chat, maybe, if people have got direct things they want to ask your help with.
Right.
Okay, thanks very much for that. And so, Rebecca, over to you for your final remarks.
Thanks, Kate, and thank you all for those really interesting and thoughtful questions. And I found myself agreeing very much with various things that Richard was saying about the complexities within this area, this country, and just wanting to reiterate, to me, what really struck me, which is why I wrote about the New York City thing in the report that I've put into the chat, was because of the very practical focus on both the city's responsibility with regard to education and the city's responsibility with regard to investments and therefore for divestment. And I think that that's one way, that those are one way in to really look at this. But I'm also very struck that we're in a year when nuclear weapons have actually been threatened. The discussions going out on all of our media. Now, they're often leaving us and the TPNW out as if we've never existed and haven't been sort of arguing these kinds of things for quite a while. But nevertheless, they are a way into the council. And I was actually going to say pretty much what Richard said, but I'll reiterate that when we get told this isn't a local matter, respond with, yes, it is, because public safety and public health are local matters. Emergency planning, if you have either a facility near you or any kind of potential for attack, or the nuclear convoy, of course. So make it local. And then, as one of the others of you, I think it was Sarah at the very end said, I think her point is a really good one of, if they keep saying it's not a local matter, take it to the media. Your local media is often quite interested to talk about how these things connect. And so I'd like to reiterate as well that you often have to have an initial, quite short resolution to get it kind of past the census. So this deals with this question asked by Chris. Do we go for a simple declaration, or do we go for something more complicated that gives us some tools? Again, it's totally determined by your local situation, but if you've only got the 250 words, then think about something that is a declaration that at least touches on the importance of public health, public safety, environmental safety, and then leaves open something with a phrase of continues to be seized with this matter, or whatever, particular diplomatic or council language is used in your particular council, because these are all different, as Richard has sort of have said, but link it to those. And then you can actually follow up after that and say, well, you passed that last year. Well, we've got something a bit more concrete now that, we've got more information here. And you bring these things out. And on the divestment issue, I just wanted to remind you not only of the great stuff coming out of Don't Bank on the Bomb and the various literature coming out of ICANN that Seth mentioned, but also here in the UK, the Nuclear Weapons Financing Research Group, which deals with banks, pensions, and investing in nuclear weapons, and has as its sort of umbrella heading, investing in change. So again, think about what works for your council. And here I'd like to actually offer my services a little bit to you, because I worked with Roz, and she's quite right. The Hiroshima Nagasaki, what are they called? Sort of commemorations were a way that she could raise this, and then the process started, and then I came in and I dealt with them directly on texts and things like that. So use every way you can. But I would like to offer my services, and I think that Richard in his job is also in a position to help with this, which is when you've got your own group together to try and work out what is the best approach, then do feel free to contact me as well as Richard, and you know, to maybe have a little Zoom meeting with me. And if you've got already a couple of councillors who are interested in this, bring them along to that Zoom meeting so that we can actually think through with you what would work best in your particular circumstances, because you know, we've had experiences, and you know, and we can bring those to bear. I'd certainly be willing to do that. I don't want to do a huge amount of traveling as I did in the heavy lifting for the TPN, for the nuclear ban treaty back in the you know, 10 years ago, but I would be very happy to you know, talk on Zoom, and I'm sure that maybe having me and Richard there would concentrate the minds, if Richard would be prepared to also do that. So there are things that we can do to help you work out what's the right strategic approach for you with your local conditions, and then also we can help with what's the right language approach for what you have that links with the TPNW but has something practical in there. So I hope we can move forward and get more councils to deal with it, because the key issue is link it now with the fact that people are talking about nuclear weapons. They're afraid of nuclear weapons. They're talking about the use of nuclear weapons again. They're talking about attacks on nuclear facilities as well as a nuclear bomb attack. So they're talking about all of those issues which are traditional issues that CND and ICANN and Mayors for Peace and local and nuclear-free local authorities have been dealing with for quite a long time, and obviously some of the religious organizations. And we should be thinking about tailoring our approaches to councils in light of the fact that it is actually already on their minds and therefore can be put on their agendas. I'll stop there.
Brilliant. Thank you for Rebecca, and thanks also for offering to assist. I think that's a great idea to have some Zoom sessions there, and I hope everyone will take those up as it will be helpful for you. So a big thank you to our speakers, to Seth, to Richard, to Rebecca. That was fantastic. Thanks to you all for coming along, and well, good luck and keep us informed. You know, let Sarah know any updates and information, and well, best of luck and keep cool, essentially.
And
Bye.
you too, Kate. Thank you to you and Sarah for bringing this together.
Thanks, Rebecca. That's really nice. Thanks. Okay, take care, everyone. Bye.